Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. The NBA Finals are still going on. Yes, they are still going on. We have some rumors and that to discuss in this episode. We do also have a comment to read out from Michael Pickering, 1039 on YouTube, and he said Mavs in 7. You guys have kind of been echoing that across multiple platforms, talking about Mavs in 7. A lot of you have commented that. Just keep in mind they're going to have to win 3 in a row for that to happen. So the likelihood is dang near impossible, as history has told us.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen teams come back from 3-1. And obviously in recent years, I guess it's happened a little more, right, because of the three-point shooting variance. And it's just so difficult to do it, right? Because again, you have, like you said, you have to win three in a row, technically four, since they've already won one.
Sure.
And also going to have to win two on the road in Boston after already losing the first two in Boston. Then you got to win both in Dallas after already losing two games in Dallas, or one game in Dallas, excuse me. And I just, there's a reason why it hasn't happened ever, right? Because it's just very difficult. We saw, in terms of, like I said, 3-1, right? Cavs did it against the Warriors. And even that was like, very unexpected and crazy at the time. Obviously, you had the Draymond Green suspension, but, still either way, even after that, it still didn't feel like it was feasible. And then obviously the Nuggets did it twice in the same postseason. Once against the Jazz and the other against the Clippers, but 3-0 hasn't happened. It was close last year because the Celtics, they were down 3-0, and then they came back and tied it up against the Heat, and they had a chance, and we actually thought they were going to pull it off in Game 7, and then Jason Tatum got hurt like in the first minute of the game, and it was over, and they got blown out. He still played, but who knows? But that's the tough part in terms of doing it because you have to, have everything go your way, right, including health. And, something could happen to, knock on wood, one of the Mavs guys, like in the midst of the comeback, and then it's over, right? Just like something could happen to the Celtics, and then, that's tough. But I don't know. I don't see that happening, but obviously we'll get into it once we start talking about the games.
Yeah, and before we do that, and get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Mini Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so game four is in the books. Dallas Mavericks prevail 122-84. They stay alive,
Yeah,
obviously. Avoid the sweep, right?
yeah,
Which obviously, if you're Dallas, is nice because you don't really want to get swept. Not that it makes a big difference if you lose in 4 or 5, but just mentally speaking, you want to get one win. Obviously, for the Mavs, we know, right? Because Luka, he was criticized heavily, right, for his games, 2 and 3 performance. His defense was really bad. At different points, guys blowing by him, a lot of really poor fouls in terms of the decision making. And it's tough, right? Because I think, like, for Luca, he's kind of in the spot now, I feel like, where a few other superstars were in a couple seasons ago, where now that he's had the taste of success, now the expectations are raised a lot more, for, how people view him as a player. Because, obviously, we saw it with Giannis, right? Where he had success, early on. Um, and then the expectations were raised. Then he had the playoff disappointments where his teams went out early. And then he was starting to get criticized, right? And it started to become like, oh, the Bucks are a regular season team, right? Giannis needs a Batman. You're not going to be able to win with him. And then he was able to overcome that and he won, right? Other guys, same thing, right? Like Jokic, right? Like people said he was out of shape, didn't play any defense. You're not going to be able to win with him,
mm-hmm.
a title with him and stuff like that. And then he was able to overcome that, right? And then, even LeBron, right? Obviously a little bit different of a conversation, but same thing, right? He went to the finals as a young guy, right? And they lost, right? But obviously no shame there, right? Then went to the finals in 2011, had a really rough series. And that's when you started seeing a lot of people turn on him, right? And then eventually, the next season, actually, he was able to overcome that. And obviously, we're not there with Luka yet because I do think this series is over. But it is kind of an interesting thing where it's like, now he's entered the realm of, hey, you've had a lot of early success now, but now you have to pull off the ultimate success. So, we'll see if he does that in the future. And obviously the series isn't quite over yet, but, in theory, it feels like it's over, even though it's 3-1. But, obviously if you're Luca, it's nice to have that response because he kind of, in a way, he led the way, right? He set the tone, playing really good, much better defense, and much more effort on that end. And the Mavs as a whole, right, played great team defense in this game, right? The Celtics couldn't hit anything. 36 from the field, 34 from three. 13 turnovers, and the Mavs went up by as much as like 48, which I think was like the the largest lead in a finals game in I think like 50 years or something like that, which is nuts. Obviously, the Mavs shot relatively well from three, right? 40 and a half from three. Although a lot of that was in garbage time because Tim Hardaway Jr., played most of the fourth quarter and hit five threes, I think, in that entire quarter. Um, but a lot of the damage for the Mavs was done in the paint, right? So obviously they attacked the basket. They kind of punished the Celtics. Took advantage of Porzingis not being available. And everything. So if you're the Mavs, it was obviously you played very well. The Celtics played very poorly, right? A lot of people think that the Celtics not necessarily lost the game on purpose, but they wanted to win in Boston. So maybe they came in with the mindset of like, all right, we'll try to win and see what happens. And then if it doesn't pan out, um, we'll just get it done in game five, which I still feel like ultimately will happen. It's just kind of rough when you have a game like that because it just feels like that they didn't show up. And you never really want to extend the series longer than you should, just because you don't want to leave the door open for, an injury or something like that. Not saying that that's going to happen. It's just obviously, you'd prefer to just close it out then and there. But you also have to factor in human nature, right? The Mavs are down 3-0. So obviously they're desperate to get a win. You knew they were going to come out with a lot of effort and energy. But it was weird because in game three, right down 0-2, the Mavs came out with a lot of energy, but then the Celtics punched back. But this time around, the Celtics didn't punch back. They just kind of fell over and were just like on to game five, right? So, we'll see what happens in game five. Obviously, if you're the Mavs, that's a nice win to stay alive, but you kind of wish that it had happened, in game three, because if it's game three, it's 2-1, then maybe, you follow it up with a game like this in Dallas.
Yeah.
Then you go back to Boston with the series tied. But instead, you're going back to Boston down 3-1. And that's just a very tough position to put yourself in. And I just
Yeah.
don't necessarily know if you can replicate, not even this performance, but I just don't know if you can replicate what you did on both ends of the floor three more times. Like maybe they could get a blowout win where Boston just shoots really poorly. Because, with Boston, they hadn't lost a game since I think the Cleveland series, right? It was the game two against the Cavs, but since then they beat the Cavs, three in a row after that. Then they swept Indiana. Then they beat Dallas three in a row after that, right? So they had basically won like 10 straight games before this one. So you knew that they were probably due for like a really, really bad performance. But I feel like this one was more so of an outlier, terrible performance. And I think in game five, they end up bouncing back. Obviously, we'll have to see what happens, but that's what I feel like to me. Like even without Porzingis, like I feel like you can play better than what we saw here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this game doesn't really change a whole lot for me. And for our pick, obviously, it's funny because we picked Celtics in six, so this
Yeah,
kind of is working technically in our favor. But at the end of the day, Boston's the more talented team. I think like you were talking about, Dallas was completely and clearly up against the wall, and they performed and they showed out. This is kind of the Dallas that I think a lot of people wanted to see, outside of the garbage time minutes, obviously. But, your main guys showed up. They were consistent on both ends of the floor.
and the
Kyrie,
bench.
yeah, and the bench, they showed up as well. That was a huge factor as well because you pretty much got something from everybody. And, I think it does kind of show, that the Celtics aren't as good without Porzingis, but I think the Celtics are still, the better, more disciplined, more hungry team, and definitely more championship ready team, especially with that starting five. But I think it also kind of goes to show you if that starting five doesn't show up, then you're not winning a single game. In Boston that is, because you look at their stats. I don't even need to read them out, but just know all of them were pretty much minus like 30 or around that range in the plus minus area. So just an overall disappointment, I think, from the Celtics. And, like you were talking about, if that was the case, that they wanted to lose this game on purpose just to close it out at home, that's a dumb decision because that could easily
Yeah,
come back and bite them in the back, especially if it
yeah.
comes out that's what they actually wanted to do. I don't
I don't
think
buy.
that's the case.
I don't buy.
Me personally, I don't buy it. That sounds like some fandom copium, but um, I just don't think Joe Mazzulla and those guys would go for that. I think they would want to kind of finish this out with a quickness and just get the job done. And
I think
that's
it
kind
was
of how
just
they carry themselves.
yeah. I think it was just a very bad game.
Me
Like you
too.
know what I mean? Like
Yes.
it happens. You just kind of just flush it away down the toilet, and then just kind of get ready for the next game. It's just obviously again you don't want it to happen because you just don't want to extend the series longer than it needs to be. But again, it doesn't matter if you win by 1 or win by 50, it's still just one win. So the
Yeah.
Mavs are in a tougher spot because they have to win 3 and the Celtics just have to win one more. And I think it's a lot more likely that the Celtics win one more out of 3 more games than it is that the Mavs win, all 3 remaining games left.
100%. And like, it the thing with Boston is everybody talks about their offense and stuff, but a lot of people, they do talk about their defense, and you could clearly see, out the gate in the first quarter they got torched and they couldn't really fight back. And I think their defense turns into offense for them, and vice versa. So if they can't get anything going, this is kind of the result. They're gonna get blown out. And I don't think anybody really saw this coming. I didn't expect there to be a single game where Dallas blew out
Yeah.
the Celtics
Yeah.
at this healthy level, where you have Tatum and Jalen Brown and all the other starters except for Porzingis. Like, I didn't expect them to get blown out like this. I thought they would be the
Yeah.
team to blow, the Dallas Mavericks
Right.
out.
Especially by like almost 50 of them.
Exactly. That's just unrealistic. So I'm personally chalking up to a bad game. And honestly, there's not much to really say, in terms of recapping. Like, there was nothing that was like super eventful. Dallas executed. They outperformed everybody, on the Celtics. So
Eric Lively made a 3.
yeah, that's crazy. When I saw that, I was like, okay, so this is pretty much over. Cool, got it.
Yeah. I mean, it looked like a good shot, like in the sense of like,
Mhm.
he shot it like he was pretty confident in
For
it. I
sure.
don't know if
It
he'll
was in the
ever
corner,
actually
right?
Yeah. I don't know if he'll ever actually be like an actual 3-point shooting center. I know he took some, I think in college, but either way, hey, it looked like a nice shot.
Yeah,
And
and
they,
if he can
they
add
left him
that,
open.
oh my god.
Yeah, and they left him open, and it felt like a weird process where it's like, hey, we're gonna swing it to the corner, but it's Derek Lively, and like that's something that the Celtics have done for most of the series is where they've taken away the lobs, they've taken away the corner three. Lo and behold, in this game, what happened? They couldn't take away the lobs, they couldn't take away the corner
Right.
threes,
And that was
and
something
their
we
offense.
talked about going into the series is like, they Dallas shoots, I think, the highest corner three percentage, and then Boston, they take away, the most corner threes. So
Right. Exactly. So if yes, like if you're the Celtics and you take away those two things, then that makes it a lot tougher for Dallas to be able to score because then it turns into okay, by taking away the lobs and corner threes, you've basically taken away a lot of what the Dallas role players do on offense.
mhm.
And then it turns into a scenario like the first 3 games where it's like it's either Luca or Kyrie or bust, basically. Right. Or like and if it's not, then it's like PJ Washington trying to post up or trying to take somebody off the dribble or, something else happening, right? Like Derek Jones Jr. driving and then getting blocked or like, shooting some horrible threes or something like that. But
Yeah.
so that's the thing. Like for the Celtics, if they don't defend and they can't score, and that's any team. Like if you're bad on both ends of the floor, like you're gonna get blown out. Unless the other team is also bad on both ends of the floor, I guess. But for any team, in any game, like if you just have a I mean, if you shoot 36% from the field, unless you hold the other team to like 38% from the field as well, like it's over, right? Like
Yeah.
the Mavs shot 50 from the field, and then they also went to the free throw line 22 times, although they didn't shoot well from the free throw line. Um, but either way, yeah, like if the Mavs basically beat you in like every statistical category, like that by a big margin, like that's how you get a big deficit, or a big margin of victory like this. But I just don't necessarily know if the Mavs are going to be able to do it again because I just feel like the Celtics will go into the next game, you know, and kind of try to put the hammer on the
Especially at
Mavs,
home, man.
right? Especially at home, and I'm sure like the Mavs will obviously they'll be focused and locked because they don't want to lose, right? So
Right.
I'm sure they're going to try to play with a lot of effort and energy and intensity as well. I just feel like the Celtics will match it, a lot more, consistently over the course of the game, as opposed to kind of just throwing in the towel after about like halfway through the second. That's
Yeah.
pretty much what it looked like,
Yeah.
right? Like this game was pretty much over, halfway through the second, right? The Mavs eventually went up by like 20, at halftime, and it was done, right? Like obviously we've seen teams come back down from 20, so it's not like you necessarily rule it out, but it just didn't feel like they had it in there. Like nobody for the Celtics played well, like you said, and if nobody plays well, you have no chance. And that's where it's going to be interesting, right? When if when and if the Celtics close it out, right? Like we've already talked about who we think is going to get Finals MVP, and it's probably still going to be Jalen Brown, right? Assuming that he has like another really good game. Um, you know, in store, right? Because obviously, like nobody really played well in this game, and Jalen Brown had the edge, before this game anyway. So as long as he plays relatively well, then it's probably his to lose.
Sure, agreed. And it's like, all these guys, I feel like, the main guys who've shown up throughout their postseason run and even in the finals, I think you can make a case for all of them. I think you can make a case for Drew Holiday. He's been, pinpoint accurate up until this game four, pretty much. He turned the
Yeah,
ball over 5 times, but before that, he didn't have a single one. And,
right.
his ability and what he was able to do, efficiently on the offensive end. And also, we already know his impact on the defensive end and what he's been able to do to limit Kyrie Irving a lot. And then, you look at Jason Tatum, he's been kind of like their all around guy. He's not really been, the main scorer at times. But he's been like, top rebounder, top playmaker, all that stuff. He stuffed the stat sheets in multiple categories. And then you have Jalen Brown, who's kind of been like their prolific scorer and also, a sleeper defender as well. He's been getting a lot of stops as well. So I think there is a case for all of them to be finals MVP. But at the end of the day, it's Jalen Brown, I think.
I think so too.
What's
I mean,
up?
ultimately, no, I mean, yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Like, I
Okay.
think so too. 'Cause I think just he's been the most consistent, of any of these guys, right?
Yeah.
Like, because Tatum has had what, like a couple of decent games, but like and it's not like he's been bad. It's just obviously like the shot making thing is kind of like the main issue. Like it
Mm-hmm.
feels like in most of these games, Jalen Brown's kind of been not like I know he's not the best player on the Celtics, but it feels like he's the guy that's kind of been like the catalyst for them winning a lot of these games
Sure.
for the most part. And again, like it's a series, right? So like we've seen before in the past, like a guy wins Finals MVP that isn't the best player on the team, right? Like Andre Iguodala won it in 2015,
Sure.
right? When it could have easily been Steph, and I was honestly at the time surprised that it wasn't Steph. Um, and even before that, right? Like we've had other times where I think it was like Joe Dumars won one for the Pistons, when Isaiah Thomas was the best player. I
Mm-hmm.
think Cornbread Maxwell, I think, for the Celtics, he won one like, when Larry Bird was on the Celtics. So like we've
Right.
seen it before.
Yeah.
Um,
Nothing new.
but either way, like somebody's got to win, right? So, and I think it's going to be the guy that's had the best performance, and I think it's him. Again, obviously, we'll see. You never know, right? Because it could be a scenario where it's like, whoever has the best game five and a Celtics win, we'll give it to them. But I think it should probably be Brown at this point.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, so I mean, I guess, in terms of predictions for game five, I'm assuming we both feel like the Celtics should win this. I know we both thought they would win game four, and that did not happen at
Yeah.
all. But I feel like, they should be better prepared to win game five. I guess, we do think that they win game five. I guess the question is, what's the scenario for the Mavs winning game five? Because I don't necessarily think you would expect like a 50-point blowout. But let's say if like what would the path be for the Mavs to be able to, pull off a game five victory and go back to Dallas for six? Just entertaining the idea.
Sure. I
Because
mean,
because it's not impossible. But
yeah.
even though I think we both believe that the Celtics will close it out.
I mean, it's clearly not impossible, or else we wouldn't have picked, Celtics in six. Like we thought this was
Right.
going to be an extended series in the first place. We were honestly
Yeah.
surprised that it took Dallas this long to win,
Yeah.
one game.
Losing game three is the one that really hurts, I think.
Absolutely, because this could be an even series. But regardless, there's a pathway, like you were talking about. Luka and Kyrie obviously have to show up on the offensive end. But I think the key also is defense. You need to get stops. You need to kind of knock these guys out of their rhythm because I think the problem is they're gonna shoot no matter what. Um, you know, and the problem with Boston is they generate so many good looks that they're bound to
Mhm,
fall. It's not like they take a bunch of horrible contested threes.
mhm.
They take a lot of good open threes.
Some of the Tatum ones, though,
Okay,
are
yeah,
kind of
the sidestep three gets a
yeah,
little redundant. I agree.
yeah,
But the majority of their threes as a
yeah,
team collectively
yeah,
are normally good open shots. It's just a matter of knocking them down. So obviously running them off the 3 point line is going to be a big deal. Also, I think it's tough to say, but take away the rim when you have a lot of guys that can play, 5 out offense. I think you do need to kind of prioritize the rim as well because there's a world where they kind of do revert back to basics and kind of just attack the rim. We see it with Jason Tatum sometimes when his three ball isn't falling, he just goes straight to the rim, tries to get to the line, whatever the case may be. So I think Gafford, Lively, they have to kind of be on point here. I think even a guy like PJ Washington, his defense, and Derrick Jones Jr., their defense has to be, stellar. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say, their shot making has to be amazing. I think it has to just be above average, probably around like 30 something, 40% from the 3 point line, generate
Mhm.
corner threes as well. And I think another catalyst is also going to be Luka Doncic's defense because we know that they've been targeting him like crazy. They've been finding the switch, kind of, hunting him because he's not just sitting around, in the low post like he was against Minnesota. Like, this is different. He's having to guard guys that can do something with the ball. So, we're seeing them kind of target him in the switch. So I think, him showing some tenacity on the defensive end, being more focused. We can't have another game 3 scenario. If you want to talk about Dallas winning, the next game, Luka's got to be locked in on defense, and Kyrie cannot disappear in Boston. That's another thing because if Kyrie disappears, it's over.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I think that's pretty much the game plan, right? It's like obviously you're not expecting a 50-point win, or anything like that, but you'd have to basically have like a pretty good game on both ends. You know what I mean? Because like I feel like the Celtics could get away with like a weird offensive game, but they could play great defense and kind of shut down what the Mavs do, and then they could probably just pull it out anyways, like we saw in the first, in games 2 and 3. But for the Mavs, I think like the floor has to be higher than Boston's because they're not as good. So it's like what they have to do in order to win is a lot more than what the Celtics have because they
Sure.
don't have as good of personnel, on both ends of the floor. Obviously, Luca and Kyrie are fantastic offensively, but they don't have as many. They don't have the elite defenders that Boston has, and the guys that are their best defensive players are not as good on offense as the guys for Boston as well, which we already knew going into the series, which is part of why we picked the Celtics to win the series.
Yep.
But I think, yeah, like there is a pathway. It's just a matter of like, is it actually going to happen? And I think that's really the bigger question. Like, was there stuff that you saw in this last game where it's like, did the Mavs actually find something? Or is it more so that like the Celtics just had a horrible game? Like, I think it's the latter. But if there
Agreed.
is one thing that you could point to that you think that they may have found, I guess the question is, what would that be?
I don't know. It's tough to kind of pinpoint because the stars, they weren't really hitting their threes. You look at them, they were
Yeah,
not really hitting them at all.
just
So,
attacking the basket, I guess, and like,
yeah.
kind of,
And I think
you know,
that's kind of what I was talking about earlier was like you
Mhm.
can see the lack of, having Kristaps Porzingis out there because now these guys are kind of looking at it like open season. Not that it really is. I think there's a potential where, if the Boston Celtics are a little bit more locked in, I think in this game, then you could see them kind of take away the rim like they normally do, even without Porzingis. But it was open season for Kyrie, Luca, even the other guys. Everybody was kind of just firing on all cylinders, and they had an on night and they had an off night. That's kind of the way that I look at it. But I don't know. That would be kind of like the one thing that I think they might have found was okay. Porzingis isn't here. They don't have that guy who can really chase us down. If it's Al Horford on a perimeter switch, he's probably not going to chase down Luca. Same goes for Kyrie. It's just a matter of if it's D White or Jalen Brown, then they probably are going to pin that thing off the backboard. But that's the thing that I think the beauty is that you have a Kyrie Irving where he's not going to get swatted off the backboard a whole lot, which is why I feel like that's why I've been so impressed with what Boston's been able to do because you do have guys that kind of make Kyrie not necessarily look useless, but make him look uncomfortable, which I think we haven't necessarily seen in a long time in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, yeah, exactly. So how I feel as well, right? Like I don't think that like I mean, spoiler alert, I don't think the Mavs will come back like from the series. I
Oh,
think they're gonna probably just
over,
lose a
bro.
game. It's just obviously we're just entertaining because we have to, right? Because obviously these are things that we should talk about and discuss because you
Yes,
just never know. But I do feel like that the Celtics just had a horrible game, and I think they will bounce back. You have like closer to an average performance on both ends of the floor, right? That's probably closer to getting it done, right? Like
sure.
like I mean I think they're gonna have to play really well. It's just like this was awful. Like I just think this is like very much like a floor type game where it's like what's the absolute worst you could play? And I'm pretty sure they said like this was their lowest offensive output of the entire season, right? So
Yeah.
like essentially, like if you tried to come up with a roadmap of like what's the worst version of this team, what's the worst possible game they could play, this would be it.
Yeah, I mean, they looked lazy, they looked complacent, comfortable, and they looked like they had no motivation to really win this thing in Dallas. And that's what I think it comes down to, and you look at it, say they had an amazing game, right? Um,
Mhm.
I still probably, I don't know. Going into the game, I think we both felt like it was going to be an outright sweep. But say they probably did have a good game. I think the
Mm,
Mavs probably would have still pulled this one out. It just would have been a closer game. And I think that
right,
kind of goes back to what we were saying going into the series was, if these point differentials were a little bit closer, then Dallas might have the edge because they have, two amazing closers in Kyrie Irving and Luca. So the game might have gone a little bit different if it was closer. You probably wouldn't have gotten as many minutes from, a couple of the guys that came off the bench. But regardless, I'm still kind of baffled that they lost in the way that they did.
right.
I didn't expect
But
it.
it happened.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be a sweep just based on what we've seen in the past. But I mean, a lot of people were talking about gentleman's sweep, so that's kind of the direction that I think we're headed in right now.
Right. And I think if I remember correctly going into this series, I think Vegas, they had the like they thought that the most likely scenarios for either team winning the series, it was if the Celtics win, it's in 5, and if the Mavs won, it would be in 6.
Okay.
But obviously, if you're the Mavs, like, you can't win in 6 anymore
No.
because you've already lost 3 times. So you'd have to win in 7, and you'd have to come back with a 3-0 deficit. But the Celtics could win in 5 and then clear it, and then it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's what they thought.
Could you imagine if the Mavs actually do pull this thing off in terms of winning in 7? Like, I feel like that might have to rank a
Yeah,
little bit
that would
higher than the three. That might be the greatest finals of all time.
it would be. It
Yeah.
would be because it wasn't 3-1, it was 3-0.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah, it's
it's
insane.
just kinda wild because a lot of people picked the Mavs, to win the series. I know Vegas had the Celtics as the favorites, but there were a lot of analysts that thought the Mavs could win it, and I think, but I guess, like, I also didn't expect the Celtics to go up 3-0. Like, so that's kind of the other thing, but yeah, if they were to come back, it would pretty much be the greatest comeback in NBA history, but I just don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but because I think it would just take some like insane performances that I think we're not ready for yet. I don't think the game is ready for those kinds of
Yeah,
performances yet, or
exactly.
it's gonna be a horrible situation where another
In
the Celtics don't have Jason Tatum or Jalen Brown. Then I'm
Right, yeah.
kind of a little bit okay. Wow,
That's
that'd
that's
be a
where
little
I
bit
think
more Mickey Mouse to me.
Yeah, that's where I think if a 3-0 comeback were to ever happen, I feel like it would have to be that. Like, I just feel like it would be a lot tougher to have, like, 4 straight just, barn burner performances versus, like, I think it would be more likely, like, if a team went up 3-0, then had horrible injury luck, and then lost 4 straight. I feel like it would be more likely that it would happen with that. But even then, like, we've seen scenarios where, like, a team's shorthanded and pulls out a win in the playoffs. So it's like you'd still have to lose 4 straight, and that's just very difficult. But
Yeah.
I guess then the other question, before we, wrap up this Celtics game 4, game 5 stuff is Porzingis, right? He's listed as question. Well, do you think he comes back,
Nope.
or do you think he just doesn't play? And then it's like it doesn't really matter.
I mean, he's not playing. I looked up that injury. Apparently it's a rare one. I can't remember the name of it right now. Um,
It's a long.
yeah, it's a long, rare one, but essentially his foot kind of like tore with his leg. So it's an
Mhm.
awkward thing. Like it's a really thick tendon that's torn somehow. So I don't know how he's even listed as like questionable or day to day. I don't think there's a shot that he plays. I would think he would be too uncomfortable. And I think that would just be too much of a risk. If it was maybe like a smaller thing, like more of like a stinger that he's kind of dealing with, something that you can really play through, then yeah, I think he would be a go. But for this injury, no shot. How about you?
Yeah, I don't think he comes back
Yeah.
either. But I also don't think you necessarily need him when you're up 3-1. I just feel like you should be able to win one, because you already won what? You already won 2 without, or no, you won 1 without him.
Yeah, one and a
So
half.
anyway, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then he only played like 20, 23 minutes, in the first 2 anyways, albeit he was a big part of those. Um, but still, like, I think you won 1 without him. So, like,
Yeah.
you should be able to win 1 more without him, I
You can
think,
feel his
especially
absence though. You can see it too.
you can. Right, you can, and that's where it may be tougher for them to win. But I think you can still win 1 if he doesn't play. I'm sure he will try to play. I just don't know if he actually will. And even if he does, what type of, like, shape is he in? Like, in
Right.
terms of, like, can he actually move? And if he can't, it would probably hurt you even more than if he wasn't playing. So,
Exactly.
but yeah, so, obviously that's that's the way it goes with these finals, right? It's
Hmm.
been a wild one for sure, right? But a lot different than I think you would have expected. But it feels like one where ultimately, we're probably going to come out on top in terms of what we thought was going to happen.
100%.
Um, but now I guess we get into some other stuff, right? Like, news and rumors going on around the league. A lot of stuff going on, right? Because obviously, as the season's getting ready to end, we know that there's a lot of teams that are looking to, change things up, make moves. And obviously one of the biggest stories is about Paul George, right? So obviously Eric Pincus, he put out, an article about some educated guesses in regards to, where, it sounds like some of these players will go. And he's saying that he believes that Paul George goes to Philly and gets the max, right? Now, obviously, if you watched game 4, right, before the game started, right, Joel Embiid was in the studio along with Paul George, right? And Joel Embiid kind of was talking about, like, we're going to make some additions in the offseason. And he almost kind of like glanced over at Paul George, in a way that kind of made you wonder, right, like what was going on. Now, obviously, I think we both kind of felt like re-signs with the Clippers, but to be fair, like that point was the first time where I actually thought like, oh, it's actually possible he could go to Philly. Obviously, we've heard some stuff about with the Clippers, they're not willing to offer him a certain amount. Like they don't want to offer him more than the max extension Kawhi got, right? Like 3 years, 150, whatever. Um, but the Sixers could give him 4 years and 212. The max that the Clippers can give him is 4 years, 221. But most people don't. But it sounds like the Clippers don't want to give him that. So I guess the question is, you know, what do you think ultimately happens? Right? Do you think that Paul George actually does leave the Clippers and ends up going to Philly, or do you think that they, find some type of mutual agreement and then he just stays with the Clippers? Because I think this could go either way. Like at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if either situation happened.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all the signs are kind of pointing in the direction of Philly.
Mm,
So I think he ultimately goes there at this point.
mm,
Now, after everything that we've kind of seen over the past couple of weeks, and all the reports and stuff, him not being offered the same amount as Kawhi, I think that's kind of a rift causer. And my question to him would be the question that's always been there is, is that situation really that much better than the Clippers one? Because you're still going to have to deal with potential Embiid health problems. I think, you'd probably be better off with Maxey than Harden at this point in both of their careers. So I think that's probably a plus side. But,
yeah,
what about your availability as well? Because what if that kind of follows suit and then, we get the whole Clippers story all over again, but just, in Philly. But
yeah,
with Philly,
because
they're 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 I think they're playing a dangerous game because if they don't get a third star, I mean, you're going to get a repeat of last season, where you pretty much have no chance of coming out of the Eastern Conference, especially considering, the Boston Celtics will still be there.
yeah, because I mean that's the thing. Like you said, there's a gamble, right? Because if you stay with the Clippers, obviously you're from LA, so you get to stay, where you're from.
Sure.
But then the issue is that, you're with a group that's an older group. And then the question would be, you already have a lot of injury concerns with those guys. What's the likelihood that it gets better? Like if you're the Clippers, how do you realistically improve, your team from what it is right now, right? Because your core is older. You don't really have picks anymore. You don't really have young players that you expect to realistically get that much better. Um, Whereas in Philadelphia, even though you have the concerns with Embiid and his health, like you said, you have Maxi, who, like you said, at this point is probably a better bet long term than Harden, because he's also much younger. And then in addition to that, even after signing Paul George, they'll still have a little bit of cap space left. I think 14 million. Now, of course, that assumes that everyone else is let go, but at the same time, some of those guys won't come back, right? Like Tobias Harris probably not coming back, right? Like Mo Bamba, probably not coming back.
Hmm.
Oubre and Lowry, I think most people expect those guys will come back, but
Absolutely.
Lowry will probably get a minimum, and then Oubre, I don't think you'll have to give him 14 million. Maybe you do, but then that's the question: is that if you get Paul George with Embiid and Maxi, and then whatever else you can pair with those guys, is that enough? To get you over the top in the Eastern Conference. Like obviously, we'd have to see what the other moves after those three are, because you have to pay Maxi, which they're going to do. You have to pay Paul George, which they're going to do if they get him, and then you have to fill in the rest of the roster. So like, is that do you think in your eyes enough to if they're healthy, could they make a run and challenge the Celtics and get out, right? Because you also heard Embiid say like he doesn't think the Celtics are a dynasty because he stated that everyone in the East was hurt, including myself. I mean, they wouldn't be a dynasty yet, anyways, because you have to win multiple titles. But either way, just do you feel like that if they got Paul George and then added whatever other pieces are remaining, right? Would that be enough, you think, in your eyes to probably, if not, get over the hump, at the very least, compete with Boston and Milwaukee?
No. In the regular season, sure. It wouldn't surprise me if they're a number one seed next year with all those additions. But come postseason, I don't trust Embiid. I don't trust his health. I don't trust, whatever Philly's got going on. I'm not saying they're cursed or anything like that, but, it always seems like there is kind of something that goes wrong, something that's never in their favor. We kind of saw it with the process era and the teams that competed during that. Even this team, you had Embiid and his injury luck this year was not good, and I just don't really see it getting better. That's the unfortunate thing about guys that are injury prone. It never really gets better.
Right.
It normally either gets worse or you kind of find a plateau. So that's kind of how I feel about them. And in terms of like the whole dynasty thing, yeah, Celtics are not a dynasty, like you said, because they haven't won multiple titles. I think they have the potential to be a dynasty if they win this one and then can obviously get back to the finals. But, I don't think Embiid should really be talking about, team construction considering the shape of Philly right now compared to what Boston's been able to do because you can't I've been saying this
Mhm.
objectively speaking you can't hate on the Celtics success and how they were able to build this team, what they've been through and how they got here. You really can't hate because once again, sure, the teams that they faced were injured, but being real, those teams healthy, I'm sorry, they're not beating the Celtics in a 7-game series. Not the way that they're constructed this year. Last year's Celtics, sure, we saw it, but not this year.
And then I guess the other question is that if you're Philly, do you go after Paul George? I guess because there's also other concerns with him because, like you said, his injury history, his health, but also his age, right? Because he's 34,
Hmm.
right? And so if you give him a 4-year max, I mean that puts him to basically like what 38,
Right.
and obviously he was really good this year. It's just you kind of expect at a certain point, right? There's going to be somewhat of a decline. Obviously, he's a very skilled, player, right? So he doesn't have to be like a super athlete, to still be really effective. But even at this point, right? Like I don't think he's quite as good defensively as he used to be. And then obviously, like he still has the random games where he just kind of disappears. Obviously, if it's Philly, right? You're not as reliant on Paul George as you might be with the Clippers because you have Embiid and Maxey. But I guess that's the real question right there. Like, is that even of the guys available the guy that they should go after?
Yeah, I mean, in a weak free agent class like this, I think, he's one of your only options,
Mhm.
especially in that category, in that tier. Everybody else is kind of a little bit below him, in my opinion. But, with him, I think there's an opportunity for him to kind of transition and become more of an off the ball player. We've seen him do it before. We know that
Mhm.
he can be a spot up guy. And obviously we know that he has a little bit of athleticism. He used to have a lot, but it's clearly dwindling with age a little bit. So, I think there is a possibility for him to find a role in Philly. It's just
Mhm.
like I said, the situation I don't think is that much better. Like these are two
Mhm.
teams that haven't found a lot of success in recent years, even though they've had some relatively good teams in the regular season, and you've had some great, stars and great faces of the franchise, but you guys just haven't been able to get over the hump. And I just don't know if hopping from the the Western Conference, and the Clippers to go to basically the Eastern Conference version of the Clippers is a smart idea.
Yeah. You could also say because it's in the East, maybe that might be easier.
Sure.
But also the Celtics are still really good, and presumably you're going to have to get through them.
Yeah, that would be my
But I
one
guess
fear.
yeah, but I guess that's still also different than having to go through a bunch of really good teams in the West. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yeah,
So
it's kind of like verse the Western Conference is like a gauntlet, and then like the Eastern Conference is right now is like kind of just one big boss room. It's weird.
yeah. And then another guy, Clay Thompson, right? So he believes Orlando ends the Splash Brothers era, right? So, basically, I guess kind of some stuff about like the Warriors, are might prioritize, saving money, right? So obviously they can pay whatever they want in order to keep him. But if you do, then that means you're way into the tax, you're way into the other aprons. You're not going to have a whole lot of flexibility. And, you're going to do that for a team that, as presently constructed, isn't good enough, to be able to win the title. Whereas like right now, the Magic are in a better situation than Golden State. right? Obviously, like historically, yes, like the Warriors are better, but right now the Magic are in a better spot just because they have cap space. They have some really good young players, so they have a lot of flexibility. Um, Now, obviously, like I guess the real question is, what are the Warriors willing to pay,
Hmm.
right? So he says Orlando does 3 years and 82 million, right? So obviously, if the Warriors don't want to do that, right, then he's gone, right? Which is kind of the case for most of these guys, right? Like say same with Paul George, right? Like if Philly offers Paul George more than the Clippers give him, then he's gone, right? So 82 million a year, or excuse me, 82 for 3 years, that's 27 million a year, right? I think Clay Thompson made like 40 this year. So if the Warriors were going to keep him, then they would have to pay him presumably like 30 or more. And so I guess the question is, are they going to do that just to keep him? Or is Orlando going to, give him that offer and then Golden State's like, we're just not going to match that? So I guess the question is, what do you think happens? And if it does happen, right, do you think that that's a good move for Orlando?
I mean, I think it's a great move for Orlando in terms of, I guess, what he brings. He fits their mold. He fits their identity in terms of, 3-point shooting, which is something that they kind of need. But really, the defense, we kind of have seen it take a little bit of a step back. But I think, it is better than their current
Mhm.
options that they have at the two. And I think it also kind
And
of opened. What's up?
and the other personnel around him in Orlando.
Sure.
Also,
Yeah. And like the other thing is, I think it also kind of opens the door for, okay, now we don't need, 2 point guards in the starting lineup. Now we have, a certified shooting guard, but, now we need to find our franchise point guard because I think that's kind of been the struggle that Orlando's had. You've had all these guards and great guards. They just kind of all do different things that are, maybe not a great combo around each other. So, you kind of just really need a playmaker if you want me to be real. But I think, him joining that roster could potentially open the
mhm,
pathway for them to find a lot of success in the coming years.
mhm,
It's just a matter of, I think it's a good investment. That's what I'll say. I don't think it's a bad one
mhm,
because it's going to be a transition because we already know. I, I'm not, I think he's done in terms of, being an elite player. But I don't have a problem overpaying for him in this situation because I think he still can bring something in a change of scenery. Because sometimes we see players
mhm.
decline and then they change scenery and then they kind of have a little bit of a resurgence a little bit. But I think that'll probably happen with him. But I don't know. We'll see. But I do like the move if Orlando really wants to do it.
Yeah, because the thing is that again, if it's 27 million, like he's gonna start, right? And then it's like you'd have him, you'd have Suggs, Wagner, Paolo, and then whoever's at the five, Wendell Carter Jr., whomever. So at
Hmm.
that point, like you're basically kind of choosing him over a point guard,
Sure.
essentially. And then you're just kind of rolling with like Anthony Black as like the backup, and then whatever else you want to do off the bench. They also mentioned the idea of Malik Monk and Tobias Harris also joining him, in Orlando, because I think even after they pay Clay, they'll still have enough, to be able to add some other guys as well. And those guys presumably won't ask for as much as, say like a Clay. So, if you can get all three, I think that's a really good free agency
Yeah,
because
that's
all three
huge.
of those guys essentially kind of do the stuff that you don't have right now. They can all shoot pretty well. Obviously Clay and Tobias Harris aren't that athletic, but you have a lot of other athletes. But and that's the thing, they make up for what you don't have simply because of the shooting and the skill. And then obviously also in the case of Clay, he's a veteran, so he's been in a lot of playoff games. Um, and you have other guys where you're not quite as reliant, on say like Clay as maybe he was in Golden State because like you have Paolo, you have Franz, like you do have these other guys. I mean, obviously, like Golden State has Steph, so it's not the same thing. But you just feel like with Orlando, you have enough young talent that, like, Clay's role doesn't really change no matter where he goes. It's just a different situation.
Sure.
But if you can get all three of those guys, I think that would be a home run. I don't know if it actually happens because again, it's an educated guess. But if it does, like, that's if you can get like a bunch of guys for Orlando that can shoot, that have that type of size, or in the case of Monk, athleticism, and then some versatility there, like that's pretty cool. I think that would be a great free agency.
Yeah.
If you're Orlando, that's a home run.
Yeah, because their problem is they have a lot of one-dimensional players at multiple positions. You have a lot of
Yeah,
guys that are like defense only, or a lot of guys that are shooting only, or something like that. So If you can add to it and get guys like you said that are versatile, and kind of fit in any role that you really want to put them in, plug and play. Yeah, it's awesome. And like you talked about, the three guys, if they can get all three of those guys, then yeah, I think they won the free agency for sure.
Yeah. And then after that, Laurie Markkinen, we believe, stays in Utah, right? We've already, we've obviously talked about that in the live stream. I mean, it's, I guess it makes sense, right? If you're Utah, I mean, I guess like it's in a weird spot, right? Because right now the team isn't that great,
Hmm.
and obviously, they're going to have, some draft picks, so they're going to be able to add some young talent. It's just obviously if he's your best player, right? Your floor for a team is probably not that high, but also he's really good. So if you're Utah, like it doesn't hurt to keep a really good player around. Obviously, if you keep him, you have to extend him, right? So that means he's going to get like a $200 million, extension, and then he becomes a much more expensive player. Um, if that's the case and they're going to keep him, then my guess would be that they would probably move on from some of the other guys on the roster, right? Like maybe Clarkson, maybe Sexton, or somebody like that. But it's one that I'm kind of mixed on because it's like you know, we like him as a player in that he's a good player. I just don't necessarily know like what the most ideal fit for him is, on a team. Like, I mean, I guess presumably like it's a good team, and he doesn't make a lot of money right now. It's just if you're Utah, I feel like he's good enough where like if you would trade him, like I would think you would ask for, if not like a decent player, then I guess picks. But I don't know. Like, it's just weird because I don't know what I expect out of Utah next year. I don't really expect them to be very good.
Mm-mm.
Uh, but I also understand, like, if you're going through a rebuild, like, it's not a bad thing to have, like, a good player on your team. Because as long as he remains good, even if you re-sign him to an extension, like, he could still be moved later. And then if he isn't moved, then that's a guy that you can still build around, I guess.
Yeah, I would say keep him. He's not
Yeah.
horrible. He's a decent player, especially like for what he is in the situation that he's in. I don't think he wants to leave that situation. I don't know what his contract looks like right now, but I know like his asking price is through the roof. And shout out to Martell because he kind of from my Miami Heat zone podcast. He talked about it. He was like, yeah, like I would love marketing, but Danny Ainge is kind of known to up the ante on a lot of these guys, and like from what I've heard and seen, a lot of they're asking for like 3 first round picks, future ones, for marketing. I don't, and also players alongside with that. So
I
that's
think
a
that comes
huge haul, for a guy like marketing. I don't think he's in that tier.
I think that comes down if they're actually going to move him. I think that
Yeah.
price comes down.
Yeah, me too. Like that's just unrealistic. So that's why I feel like he's not getting moved, or else, I don't think he would be kind of like, be priced at that kind of, price point. So but yeah, I think he should stay because I think there's a possibility like he thugs out the rebuild and lives through the dog days, then they're good and they have a team not necessarily built around him but built with him. There's potential for the Utah to be a good team with Markkinen on their team. I just don't think there's potential for Utah to be a good team and Markkinen is your best player. That's what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I pretty much ultimately feel about it at this
Yeah.
point. Because again, like I think he's very good, and I think he can help a team. It's just like I don't know what Utah wants to do. Like at this point, like
Yeah.
I'm not like not in a bad way. I'm just not really sure what their goal is because I've heard stuff about them looking to trade or win now players, to play with marketing.
Sure.
But then we've also heard like random stuff about teams being interested in him, if they want to trade him. So like I don't think he's untouchable. I just don't really think that the asking price for him is that realistic. So it's either the asking price comes down and then there's an offer that they like and then they move him, or they end up not trading him at all. They re-sign him and then just do whatever.
Yeah.
Then with Isaiah Hartenstein, maybe goes to Oklahoma City in the sense of the Knicks can't afford to, pay him more than 16 million a year, but OKC and other teams with cap space could give him more. And if you're, Oklahoma City, that's a solid center. He does things that you don't really have on the roster right now. You don't really have a lot of guys with size that can rebound and defend, right? You have guys that can defend, right? You have some guys that can get you some rebounds, but they don't have size. And Oklahoma City was not a very good rebounding team last year, right? That was kind of one of the big issues with them against the Mavs, right? Is that their bigs for Dallas kind of overwhelmed them. But if you have a guy like Hardenstein, then that's less likely to happen. And they'll, and I guess if that's the case, like you'll still have some cap space, I think, to be able to add some other pieces that, aren't in that same tier. So if you're Oklahoma City, this makes sense. Obviously, 20 million a year is a lot, for Hardenstein, but he's still a good player. But it's just like if you're the Knicks, it's tough because I feel like you can't really afford to lose him. Not because Mitchell Robinson isn't good. It's just I think you'd like to have both, and then have the flexibility where like if someone else comes along, then you have a trade chip, in one of those guys. Versus like if you lose Hartenstein, then you have to rely on Mitchell Robinson unless you can find a center elsewhere. And with Robinson, given his injury concerns, I don't know if that's really a great bet. Like I feel like if you're the Knicks, like I'm not saying that like the season is over if they lose him, but I feel like you can't really afford to lose him because I just don't think there's a means to replace him because it's not like they're gonna have a bunch of cap open up if he's gone and then you can replace him with another center. And I think a lot of what he does really fits well with what the Knicks like to do. So like if you're the Knicks, I think that would be a very tough loss.
Yeah, I agree. I think he would help OKC, but we talked about this in the live stream and we asked OKC fan, he's high on the move, but for me personally, I think, with the assets and cap that the Oklahoma City Thunder have, I think they can make a bigger and better splash than that. I think there's a possibility for that to happen. It's just a matter of, do they want to use those assets or hang on to them? Because I think there is a world where if you hang on to them, it gets a little dangerous. But, it wouldn't be a bad move to sign him, like you were talking about with the rebounding. It's just, you said it as well. The Knicks have a lot more to lose in this situation because then, you lose your potential starting or backup big man, and he brings a lot to the table. Me personally, I just don't know if teams are going to overpay him. That would be my kind of one thing, but I think there's a possibility because he does have a lot of value as considering his postseason performances.
Yeah, because like if the Knicks get him back, then like OKC could probably pivot towards the trade market.
Right?
But like if the Knicks lose out, then I don't really know what they do. Like I guess they could look at the trade market, but you wouldn't have, a whole lot of
No,
stuff at this point to really move,
they'd have to
right?
chalk it up to a loss, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Because
Yeah,
again, I don't. They're not going to be a cap space team
yeah,
regardless of what happens. Like if
right,
he, like I said, if he leaves, they're not going to have 16, or 20 million to spend. Like that's not going to happen. So.
right.
And then, there's some other like smaller stuff like, Caleb Martin with Oklahoma City, right? Derek Jones Jr. The Mavs trading Hardaway to probably keep and resign him. And then obviously with the Spurs, they might sign, a guy like the Tyus Jones to add to the point guard rotation. But that stuff, those are smaller things, but those are all fine. I guess you can give your brief thoughts on those if you want, before we get to, one of the other ones on this list.
I mean, they're interesting. I think they're good moves
Yeah.
potentially, but yeah, they're overall like kind of moves that do make sense.
Right. Then also Chris Paul, LA. That was kind of a strange one to me. Obviously we've heard about that for I don't know forever at this point. I feel like we've heard this for at least like 3, 4 years, right? Because
Yeah,
I think even after the Suns, I think came off the finals, right? Like people were talking about, like yeah, that could be a guy they trade for. Then last offseason, I think that was before he was traded to Golden State, right? That was another thing. Although I think it was more so like if he were to get traded and then get bought out by a team. But now, right, it sounds like Golden State isn't going to guarantee his contract, so he'll probably be a free agent. And then it would be more likely if he goes there. Like on a minimum contract, you can't really hate on a minimum contract. I would just be kind of curious to see how the fit would be. I guess the issue right now is like if you're the Lakers, you have a lot of guards. So, that to me feels like something that would more than likely happen if they get their guard situation sorted out, right? Like if you move D'Lo and bring in somebody else, if you move Gabe Vincent and bring in somebody else at another position or something like that, and then like now we need a backup point guard, then you do that. But like if you're running everybody back, then that doesn't make as much sense. But I don't know if they're going to run it back because obviously, they weren't good enough. So if it happens, it's strange. Obviously, we've talked about it. It was a strange fit in Golden State, right? And like the offense was never really, I think, the issue. It was more so like, how do you fit him in defensively with the other guys for the Warriors? Because then it just makes them a lot smaller, which is a problem, right? Because you don't want the Warriors to be smaller. And like I guess in LA, you'd have some similar concerns as well. Obviously, you have more size to work with because you have LeBron and AD. But then you still have the other issue of like guys at other positions. Like you don't have a lot of athletic guards. And I think like if you're the Lakers, that's something that you would like to add on to the rotation is some more athletic guards. And he's not really that. So like I said, the only reason The only way where I think I would be cool with this as a Laker fan, like I said, is if it's a scenario where some of the other guards they move on from, and then they're like, "Well, we can get him for the minimum, so we'll bring him in, and then that's fine." But if it's
Yeah.
like just to add on as an extra guard, that doesn't make sense. But you know, I don't know. What do you think?
I
Like, I
mean,
understand like from certain points, it's just kind of weird.
if it's an overhaul of the roster and like you were talking about, an overhaul of the guard room, and okay, you can bring him in as long as he doesn't start. But me personally, that wouldn't be one of my top targets. I think
Hmm.
there's room for improvement elsewhere on the roster.
Hmm.
And moving some of the bench pieces for sure, and maybe getting off of some other contracts like maybe Gabe Vincent. I don't think that was a great move looking back on it. When it initially happened, everybody was kind of like salivating over it, like, oh my gosh, yeah, great move, because we thought he was kind of going to play like how he had been playing throughout the postseason last year, but that didn't happen. And the injury, of course, that didn't help. So you didn't even really get the most out of him.
Right.
D'Lo, he's always going to be a trade piece, potential trade piece. He's always in the trade talk. So if he's traded, like you talked about, okay, cool. Bring him in as a backup point guard and see where that goes. But I'm not paying. I'm not overpaying. Not doing anything like that. Just bring him in on the minimum deal,
Hmm.
if possible. But if you want me to be honest, I'm really looking elsewhere, just because I think if you want to build a championship roster, starting with a guy like Chris Paul for your target, I don't think that's kind of like more of a non-starter for me. I just don't think he can be on a championship roster, and play crucial minutes.
Yeah, I guess the comparison, if you wanted to make what I guess could be like Rondo, right? When the Lakers won the title.
Okay.
And he was like, the backup point guard, and he played a lot, more than I would have expected at that point. So that would probably be the closer,
But he
the
had so
closest.
much defense potential, though, right? Like he had good defense on that Lakers
Right.
team, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I guess that yeah, and I guess like he also could shoot three, and that was really the difference because in the regular season he couldn't really shoot that well,
Sure.
and then in the postseason he shot like 40% from three. If he doesn't shoot that well, then it looks a lot uglier,
Sure.
right? And Chris Paul, I guess he's a better 3-point shooter than Rondo, or he always was. So that's where it would probably make a little bit more sense, I guess. It's just like you said, it's not really a priority signing.
Yeah.
For me, I would like it's like if like we said, if you overhaul the roster, make some changes, and then you need a backup point guard, that's fine. But like if it's a roster that's like, oh, you only really moved like one or two guys, and then you're just bringing in Chris Paul, I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably also a LeBron signing as well.
It
If I'm
has to
gonna be
be. It has to be.
yeah. Um. Then moving on, also according to Mark Stein, right, he believes that Redick is the favorite for the Lakers job. LA Times Dan Wojcicki, he mentioned that Redick had a formal meeting on Saturday to discuss the head coaching vacancy. So at this point, it kind of feels like it's probably him. But we have to probably wait until the finals are over. I guess for him to officially announce he got the job, if that's how it's going to be, or something else like that. Which is funny, right? Because we're back here again, right? Because initially we thought it was Redick, then Hurley came out of nowhere, and then we thought it was going to be Hurley, and now it's not Hurley, and
Yeah.
now it's probably going to be Redick again.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, no. At one point, people were saying that Redick was so mad that he may not even take it, and that it might be like James Borrego. But then Borrego is probably going to go to Cleveland, so then maybe it's Sam Cassell. But now it's back to JJ Redick.
Yeah. Side note, I think Sam Cassell does deserve an opportunity to be a head coach. Number one, he was an assistant coach for the Wizards, so just wanted to give him a
Right.
shout. But yeah,
Hmm.
spoiler, that JJ Redick thing is happening. The draft is in what, 9 days from now. Finals should be over by then, hopefully. Yeah, JJ Redick's the coach of the Lakers. I think everybody can kind of see it. Everybody
Right.
knows it. It's just a matter of until it's official. Yeah, we've talked about it multiple times. Could be the biggest disaster on the planet, or it could be a potential success, for the future, and you could get an awesome coach. And I think the problem is everybody's talking about the lack of experience. Yeah, it's kind of like when you graduate college, and you're trying to find an entry level job, and then it's like, oh well, you need experience. Well, how on earth do I get experience? This is kind of his trial run. It's just unfortunate that your trial run comes with all these eyes, all this pressure, and you're the talk of the town. It'd be different if he was kind of coaching somewhere else, maybe with a team that doesn't have necessarily any goals in the next 5 years, but you have
But
LeBron
yeah,
James and AD on your roster, so championship or bust. And that's
right.
unfortunate for a coach, especially with the Lakers. We know it may not necessarily be 100% of the coach's fault, but if they have a losing season or, a bad season in the playoffs or something like that, JJ Redick's going to bear the brunt of that.
Like essentially, like Ham went to the conference finals in his first year. So essentially, like in order to, I guess kind of quote unquote say that this is an upgrade, you got to basically match that essentially. And
Or
so it's
better.
like, yeah, or better, which again, that means finals, which would be, a very tall task, I think.
Bro,
Um,
Vogel got
you know,
fired pretty much after winning a title. Come on now. Let's be
right.
serious.
So yeah, so that's yeah, so that would be my thing is like if that's the case, like yeah, you're gonna have to, be able to match what he did in the first year. And obviously other stuff happened like in year two, right, where he lost the locker room. But at the same time, again, like you gotta at least match that. Because otherwise, like if it's like another first round exit or play in or whatever, then it's like what was really the point? I mean, other than of course, I guess, him losing the locker room, then it's
Sure.
like, okay.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's one of the most intriguing situations I think of all
right.
time that we've ever seen for a coach because it's a guy
Hmm.
like we know he's got the basketball smarts. We know he can talk basketball for days, hours, weeks, but you know, can he coach? We
Right.
don't know. We don't know.
Yeah,
This is like an
yeah, like
internship, you know?
yeah. I mean, sometimes like we have to say we don't know.
We
Like if
don't
I'm
know.
like, I know that like obviously we're on the podcast, so it's like it'd be nice if we could just say like we know, but we're not just also gonna just lie and pretend
Yeah.
like we know what's gonna happen. Like we don't know if he's gonna be good or not.
Yeah.
But I would also say I would need to see what they do with the roster first,
Yeah, that's a
right?
big
Like if
key.
it's yeah, like if like let's say if you swap Ham with Reddick last year, like, does that put them over the top against the Nuggets? Like,
No.
I don't think so personally, but
Things would have
maybe
looked
they're
different.
yeah, like maybe it's different, but I don't know if it necessarily like results in oh we beat the Nuggets. Like I don't know. I
I
don't know
don't
how to
think
feel
it
about
does. Not with that
that.
personnel.
Right. Then after that, Mark Stein, Pistons likely keeping Monty. Williams expected to return for a second season despite changes in front office. So I mean, I guess they had a horrible season, but I don't necessarily know if I would say it's entirely his fault. He wasn't good.
Yeah.
Played Killian Hayes too much. Um, but I
I
guess
think
in
that
a
was on
way,
purpose though.
yeah. But I guess it's fair to say like, hey, we're gonna have a lottery pick coming in. Hopefully some guys, are healthier this year. The roster may look different. Let's see what it looks like in year two. If it still sucks, then yeah, you're gone. But if there's improvement, then we may have something. Like I don't really have an issue with that. Like
Yeah.
again, he stunk last year. But also like, I don't know. Like I mean, the team also wasn't very good, but I guess it was also pretty surprising as to how bad. I think that like that I guess like the question is like if you had a better coach, yeah, they probably win more games, but they're still probably not close to being a playing team. They're still probably bad.
Yeah. Everything about Detroit sucked last year. So, you know, you start with the front office. If you need to make a coaching change, you'll need to make a coaching change. But 1 year, I don't think is enough to kind of get the gist of somebody, unless you clearly can see they don't know what the heck they're doing. And I think he knew a little bit of what he was doing, but I think there were also some other factors like you kind of had to find a reason to get away from Killian Hayes, and they found that. And then
Yeah,
the
just
injuries
cut him.
didn't help. Yeah, exactly. They cut him. They figured that out very quickly.
Yeah. Then after that, Cavs, according to Mark Stein, hesitant to trade Allen. Donovan Mitchell doesn't want to lose Jared as a team. Um, so we've heard a lot of different things about Cleveland, right, over the last month, right? So we've heard that, hey, guys, we're not happy with Jared Allen for not, playing through pain. Or, hey, guys, we don't want to trade, Darius Garland. But then it's like at the same time, like, oh, Garland wants to be gone if Mitchell's still. But then it's like, no, we want to keep both of them. Or, just a lot of different things back and forth. So Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, to kind of add in, as well as Jake Fisher, right? Like Jake Fisher believes that Mitchell will sign the extension, according to people around the league, and Scotto believes that he'll do it as well. So if that's the case, and Mitchell stays, or at least signs an extension, then I guess the question is, what did they do with the rest of the group, right? Jake Fisher believes that they're not going to entertain any trade offers, right? Entertain any trade offers. Now that's right now, so it could obviously change later. But I guess the question is like, what do you even expect the Cavs to do? Like, do you expect one of those four guys to be gone next season, or do you think that they actually all end up staying, and then maybe they just see what happens in year three of this, and then go from there? Because I think the issue is that you got to the second round, but can you get further? And I don't necessarily know if they can do that. I guess maybe if one of the young guys takes a leap, maybe, but I just don't necessarily see it, in that regard. Like I don't know. Like I could be wrong. And maybe it's like if you don't play the Celtics in the second round, but maybe you play, the Knicks or something like that, right? Like if you're on the opposite bracket, maybe, but I don't know. Like I just feel like this team has a ceiling on it.
Yeah.
With the roster as currently constructed.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I don't know. They I don't know. Like you said, I feel like they're capped out, you know?
Mhm.
Like I don't know. Like that's really all I say is like they're really capped out. I don't know.
Right. Um, Other stuff, according to Hoops Hype, right? Clarkson and Sexton could become available. So some NBA executives believe Jazz will consider trading guards. Makes sense. I mean, again, like there are teams that probably want them. So if teams want them, they're willing to give up stuff. Why not? Because these are not guys that are cornerstone pieces of your team. And then that opens up more minutes for the young guys, right? That opens up more minutes for Keontae George, right? It opens up minutes for for whoever they draft on the roster that's a guard or whatever in this draft, right? If they even draft one. So it makes sense. Like to me, you know, there's a lot of guys on this, like there are very few Jazz guys on this team that I think like that they're not going to at least entertain the idea of trading.
Yeah. And it's like, I think they do have a lot of value. I think they can be, some vital pieces to your team. Building blocks for sure and kind of like additions, but definitely not guys you would really want to build around. But I think there is a lot of potential for, those guys to flourish kind of elsewhere. I think they can be a part of some winning teams.
Yeah. And then after that, um, Barnes and Herter may be on Kings trading block. Sacramento will be looking to make changes after disappointing campaign. This also comes from Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. Right now, again, a lot of this is what a lot of the executives expect, these teams to do, which is different from what, these teams might actually do. But if you're the Kings, it makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously, like, you're not moving Sabonis, you're not moving De'Aaron Fox, you're not moving Keegan Murray. So, once you move off of those three guys, the only other guys that, make sense that make money that you could move would be like Kevin Herter or Harrison Barnes, right? Because those are kind of the weak links, on your team, right? Obviously, they had um, the guy that was the backup guard that ended up starting, Keon Ellis, right? He ended up starting and he played pretty well. Again, it's a smaller sample size. So maybe you could say, like, we can move Kevin Herter if Keon Ellis, continues to progress, and improve. And then Barnes, just because of his age, right? You don't really, you expect him to probably decline and probably just move him elsewhere. Not that they have to do it, but if you're the Kings, again, you're maxed out with the roster as currently constructed, right? Like, obviously Fox could get better, or even maybe Sabonis gets a little bit better, but you still need improvement, in better players elsewhere on the roster, really to make like a bigger leap forward. So to me, like it makes sense that you would probably start with those two guys, if you're trying to improve, especially again because you're probably going to lose Malik Monk, and if you do, right, then you need to make upgrades, especially because he was, has pretty much been like their, one of their three best players, other than I guess Keegan Murray.
Yeah. I feel like, one of them is going to get moved at the deadline, and the other one's going to get moved in the off season, but I don't know which one is which, but I think like you said, it makes sense, and really specifically for Herter, I feel like, he had a super down year in terms of what he's normally able to do. Um, and then, with Harrison Barnes, I don't know. I just don't think you can probably contend with that starting five. I think, you need to probably just get a third star.
Yeah, and then after that, then last but not least, just some teams kind of talking about maybe trading their picks, right? So obviously, like Houston, according to Hoops Hype, could be open to moving the number three pick, um, for a win now player. Um, the Spurs, interestingly enough, which I was not aware of, right, would consider trading up in the draft a guy like Risa Share. And also the Hawks could, now obviously if they trade their pick, they have the number one pick, so they would trade down. So of these three different teams, right? What do you think would make the most sense for each of these teams? Because I feel like all of them make sense, but I guess what do you expect to happen? I guess is the better question.
Mm.
With these three teams, because I feel like again, if you're the Hawks and you trade the number one pick, I guess if you trade down, right, then I would be curious to see who they would trade down to, and then obviously the Spurs, I'd be curious how you would get to trading up in the draft, because I'm assuming you'd have to move a player. Um, and then obviously, for Houston, right? I'd be curious who they would move the pick for.
Yeah. I think the Houston one and the Spurs one are probably the most like it seems like Atlanta is kind of um set on using that pick, number one pick. I don't know. That's kind of what I've seen. They're kind of, leaning towards, one of the big men. Um and that makes sense, I think. Just kind of retool, rehash, and Trey Young makes guys look better, but with the Rockets, I think that's kind of the smartest one, because
Mhm.
you get to move on from the third pick in a weak draft, and get some potential compensation because I think teams will kind of be looking to move up. Maybe it's I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what team would kind of bite for that though. That would be my one question. It would kind of have to
Right.
be a team that's probably, middle of the lottery who thinks they can get a player that's not going to fall that far. Because
Right.
the problem is this draft is so like you don't know who's going number one. Because as soon as the number one pick is called, like the tone is going to be set. So,
Right.
the number one pick could be somebody else's like mock number five or something like that. That's the problem with this draft.
Yeah.
So like the Spurs could be trading up for, like you said, Reese Air or Rob Dillingham. They could be trading up for God knows what. And that's the thing. I just don't know who the Spurs would be trading up for or with. More so than for. So like what they would be trading up with the Wizards to number two, like because Reese Air
Yeah.
is kind of projected either one or two. There's no shot he
Right.
falls to past three. I think
Right.
so. That would
But
be
then
my
it's like,
question.
yeah, but then it's like, say if the Hawks trade down, right? Because the Spurs, what do they have? 4? Yeah. So like it maybe in theory, the Hawks could be like, we're gonna trade down to 4, and then we'll take Klingon, and then maybe the Spurs use the number one pick. And the thing about the Hawks possibly trading that pick comes from Kevin O'Connor of the Ringer. But just kind of just to cite it. But
Sure.
like yeah, and that's the thing, like you mentioned, is there's a lot of different options, right? So like if you're the Hawks and you're trying to get Donovan Klingon, um, you might just be like, well, if we make the trade and we trade down, well, the whoever gets the one pick isn't drafting it. So then we might have the opportunity to get another asset, right? Like say the Celtics, right? They had the number one pick way back when, and then they traded with the Sixers and they traded down to get another pick, and they took Tatum, and
Yeah.
so the Sixers could take Markel Fultz. So maybe you have a situation like that. Um, but yeah, and that's the thing that I think
Normally
is
when
going to
that
be
happens,
right,
the team that ends up trading up is normally the one that takes the L, and that's
right.
across
So
all sports. So
right, because it's usually kind of difficult to trade down and then but still pick the better player.
yeah,
Um, but I guess it's happened, because obviously Tatum was the better player.
yeah,
But but also I guess you would do that. That would be like one of those, I guess, educated moves, right? Where it's like if you're the Celtics, you're not trading down if you didn't know for sure that the Sixers aren't going to take Jason Tatum,
exactly.
right? Just like or like say like with the Lakers, right? They took Lonzo Ball,
Yeah,
right? So like if you're the Celtics and you trade, down, knowing that Tatum would be at 3, well, what if the Lakers took Jason Tatum? Then you'd be in a tough spot. So like that's the point where it's like, if you're doing that, that's an educated
yeah.
decision
Then
right
it's
there.
over. You can't do anything.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
this draft is gonna be hilarious.
Right, and that's the thing where it's like watching it in real time, I think is going to be really intriguing because, if there are a lot of trades where teams are moving up or down or there is player movement,
Yeah.
then that's where, like we're going to have to kind of wrap our brains around like a lot of the movement that happens because
Hmm.
last year, right, there wasn't a lot of movement player wise. I know some players got traded, in the draft in terms of the actual picks, but not in comparison to like previous years, right?
Right.
Like most of the teams ended up kind of just picking who they had and just kind of sticking with them. Whereas we've seen in previous years like a lot of movement. But if this is a year where like if this is a draft where there's a lot of movement, from between players and picks, that's where like even though like the players themselves may not be quite as quote unquote exciting, the movement will be fun. And then again, there's still going to be, I think, a lot of productive players in this draft, which I think is really the key here. Because obviously, this draft has been pegged as a bad draft, but it's because the talent at the top isn't really there's nobody projected to be a superstar. It's
Right.
not that like there's the draft is just littered with horrible players. It's just that you know even a guy that would be a number 6 pick in a lot of drafts is going to be like the number 1 or 2 pick.
Yep.
This time around.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be guys that will be better than expected. But
Yes.
to be fair, there will also always be guys that will be worse than expected.
Very true.
And that's probably what we'll get into once we eventually do our mock drafts, which this will probably be one of the toughest, but also one of the funniest mock drafts.
Yeah, I think
Um,
they're going to be very different because a lot of
yeah,
people have a lot of different opinions on a lot of the prospects, which is a good thing. I think at the end of the day, it adds some variation. I don't think anybody is going to be 100% correct. Um, but yeah, it's going to be tough because, like I said, the order is not set. There is no clear cut number one pick. So, like, say Rob Dillingham goes number one, then it's like, okay, well, that just ruined pretty much everybody's mock draft. Now
right.
that probably even ruined a couple of NBA mock drafts. That
Yeah,
teams have, and draft boards are just cursed.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, but that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, you know, please like, comment, and subscribe. On these videos, right? We're trying to get to 100 subscribers. So obviously we've seen people subscribe, to these videos more, right? As our content, has continued to be put out. Obviously, don't forget, right after Game 5, regardless of what happens, we will have a live stream. So hopefully we see you there, right? So, we again, as the off season comes in, we're gonna have a lot of stuff coming up, right? We'll continue to do videos and live streams and whatnot. We'll live stream the draft as well. Obviously we'll have to go over our schedules and whatnot, but it should be happening at least for the first round. But either way, again, as we already said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So hopefully we either see you on the next live stream, shortly after Game 5, or we'll see you for the next episode.